This will be the most comprehensive car buying guide that you can find on the internet for free. I've owned more than 25 cars and motorbikes, and I'm only 25 years old, which means that over the past few years, I've bought and sold cars incredibly frequently. In today's video, we're going to be running through all the tips that I've learned, traps to avoid, and I'm going to be taking you step by step through a comprehensive guide of how to find a car, how to inspect a car, and how to make the transaction and ensure that you get the best deal. My name's Pat, you're watching 2PJZ, so let's get into it. Let's dive into actually finding the car. In this video, I'm assuming that you already know roughly what sort of car you want to buy. I could do a whole separate video on how to find the best car to suit your needs, and I'll save that for another day. But if you're watching this video, let's assume that you already know the exact model that you want to buy. The most common way these days to find a car is through some form of online platform. In Australia, Car Sales is a premier platform for finding cars. You can also use Facebook Marketplace, Gumtree, and a number of other online advertisement sites. Recently, I've bought and sold a lot of cars off Facebook Marketplace. I find that it's where most people are, considering it's free to list cars there, whereas on Car Sales you have to pay. But this also means that sometimes there can be higher quality cars on Car Sales because the owners are actually paying to list the car there. When you come across an ad for a car, this is usually an incredibly early telltale sign to dictate whether the car is good or a lemon. I've always thought in my buying and selling experience that if the seller has put the time into crafting a well-written, clear, honest ad, it usually means that the car itself is quite honest. If you click on an ad and the seller's only got about 3 or 4 lines of really poorly written, limited details about the car, I will often say that this is a sign that the seller has not looked after their car. So when you're reading an ad, things to look for are the kilometers the car has, its service history, how many owners the car has, if it's been modified, and if so, what the modifications are. And if you're in the eastern states of Australia, looking at whether it needs a roadworthy certificate, if the seller's willing to include this in the price, and just what the issues with the car are. Now, not every single ad is going to have all of these things. For example, if you're looking at a car sales ad, a large percentage of ads will just have the generic car sales text. But diligent owners, as I said, will put the time into writing a good ad. You don't have to have a Ferrari to write a good ad. I've seen beautifully written ads for someone who genuinely loved their $5,000 Toyota Camry. So this rule is one of the first things that I tell people when they're buying a car, is make sure that someone has written a good ad for their car. Now that you've found an example of a car that you like and you've read the ad, it's time to message the seller. Do not message the seller just asking, is this available? This is one of the first ways to really get the seller on the back foot and to come across as a time waster or a bot. Ask them a question that's a little bit more real. What I mean by this is ask them something about the car. Find something that is on the car that you want to ask about. For example, I messaged someone the other day about a car that had a little bit of paint peel on the rear right quarter. So I asked about that. I said, how long's the paint peel been there for? And this gets you straight into a conversation with a seller of not asking a generic question, and it shows that you also have a genuine interest in this car and you're less likely to be a time waster. When people list things online these days, and I'm sure it's happened to you too, you'll have heaps of people saying, is this available? Best price, sending you just a number offer of the car. And you know that these people are all lowballing time wasters and you don't want to do business with them. So make sure that when you message a seller, you're asking them something specific about the car. It could even be something as basic as, how long have you had it for? Even if it's in the ad. Say, nice car, been looking for one of these for a while. How long have you had it for? When was it last serviced? Just something to get you into the conversation. And then I'd usually start by massaging the seller. What I mean by massaging is rather than going in for the kill and trying to negotiate straight away without even seeing the car, spend a bit of time getting to know the seller and understanding their story behind the car. Ask them, as I mentioned, how long they've had it, why they're selling it, what they're moving on to next. This is particularly good for car enthusiasts. If they're selling some form of modified car or enthusiast car, they will sometimes be upgrading to go to something better. So you can start a conversation about that. You can tell them about some cars that you've had, or if you're just looking at a Toyota Camry or a Corolla or something really basic, just ask them a few generic questions about the car to get their guard down a bit. This is a really important step for developing a relationship with a seller that I will be talking about later on in the video. And the relationship with the seller is the key thing that you need to make sure that you get a better deal by the end of this. Once you've asked the seller a few things about the car, Ask them openly about the issues. If you spent a bit of time to get to know the seller, hopefully they should be open with telling you about the issues before you get there to inspect the car. This is also something that sellers will mention in ads if they're trying to be as honest as possible. It could have some form of oil leak, it could have paint defects, it could have something wrong with the electronics. Sellers will often mention this in the ad. If they haven't, ask them about it in conversation, because you will find out by the time you get to the inspection, which is the next step. Once you're ready to book an inspection, organize a time with the seller and go to meet them. The last part before actually seeing the car in person is to do your research. In this whole process, I honestly think the research phase is perhaps the most important, because not only does this influence whether you actually buy the car or not, but it influences when you inspect the car, what sort of issues and things you're looking for, and long-term ownership experience of the car. Particularly if this is a used car, there will be plenty of forums that you can read, owners' reviews, professional car journalism that you can read about these cars. So just make sure that you're doing the widest amount of research you can. Things to look for when you're undertaking this research is reviews. So common problems and gripes that people have with the cars, because this is something and a very easy way to tell if this is actually going to put you off owning this car for the long term. Another thing to look for is common problems. Each car will have its own unique issues. For example, if you're looking at older Japanese cars, they could be more prone to rust than newer European cars. But newer European cars will have more issues with their electronics failing than older Japanese cars. So make sure that you know the specific issues that your car has. For example, when I was buying my BMW E36, one thing that every E36 person knows is that the cooling systems are very brittle. But this might not apply if you're looking at a Toyota Chaser, like a next car I'm considering buying. So just keep in mind that you need to research different things to do with different cars. So then once you go to the inspection, when you're asking these questions to the seller that you found based on your research, you look like a much more informed buyer, and it makes you look a lot more legitimate than just asking the stock standard questions of how many owners has this had? How many kilometers has it got? Does it go fast? Do the tires need changing? Ask these granular questions, because particularly on an enthusiast car like I've bought multiple times, this will allow the seller to see that you are much more engaging than a potential other buyer, and he might often prioritize your transaction over someone else's. Another thing to do, and this is particularly applicable if you're in Australia, I'm not exactly sure what the system is in the US or the UK, is to do what's called a PPSR check. To do this, you need to get the vehicle's VIN, which is a vehicle identification number. You plug it in to an online system, you pay about $2, and this is an official government check to show you if the car's been recorded as stolen, written off, or if there's finance owing. These are three things that you don't want. They're not deal breakers, but they're things that you don't want to pop up if you're not aware of them. If you're looking at a Japanese import, you want to make sure that the seller has access to the export certificate. And if he doesn't, or if she doesn't, you can go to places like Japanese Odometer Check and several other online sites that can scour the Japanese auctions for you, previous results, and find you the auction sheet, the export certificate, and any other documentation, because the export certificate on a Japanese car will help you prevent buying something that has had the odometer rolled back. These things that I've mentioned before are stupidly easy, and it's the easiest and simplest way that you can tell whether you're about to buy something that is going to get you into a lot of trouble. So now we've got to the part of actually inspecting the car. We've just arrived, and before we actually get into what we need to do in an inspection, I want to make a few very important points. Firstly, I would never recommend to see a car at night. This is not only for safety, but also because at night you can't see all the imperfections that might be on a car. Particularly if you're meeting a seller at their house when it's dark. It could be a little bit different under shopping centre lights, but even then, it's still much better to pick a day where you can go out and see the car in the sun. This is also really important for safety. If you're going by yourself to see a car at night, if you have to do it, if you've got no other choice, do not go by yourself. Bring a friend or bring someone you trust just to be there with you in case anything goes pear-shaped, particularly if you're getting some weird vibes from the seller. Also, something to consider is whether the car is being cleaned. Our test subject today is my girlfriend's i30, and you can tell that this car has obviously not been cleaned before we got to the inspection today. And this again is a potential another red flag. Yes, I admit the seller might not have had time to clean it, but again, this goes back to the ad. If they do care about their car, they will take the time to clean it before you come, if they do actually want to make a genuine sale to you. Also, looking at a dirty car, you can't see where all the imperfections are, because if there's dirt or debris on the car, it will hide a large percentage of scratches and a large number of dings. So keep that in mind and make sure you're looking for a clean car and you're looking at a car in the daytime. So when you arrive to the inspection, before we even begin looking at the car, take a few minutes to break the ice with the seller. This will pay off dividends in the long term, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about establishing that relationship. Ask the seller how their day's been, what they've been up to, learn a little bit about them, because this will calm them, this will keep their guard down and help break the ice. So when you do have to ask the tough questions later, it becomes a lot easier and it takes away from the awkwardness of this whole process. Two things to remember to bring with you to an inspection are a rag and a torch. You can use the torch from the back of your iPhone, but I would recommend bringing a heavy duty torch so you can see down the side of the engine bay to check for any leaks that we'll talk about in a minute. So now we're ready to begin the inspection. The first thing that I'd recommend is taking a good look around the car. So you want to make sure cosmetically there's no massive scratches, there's no dings or paint peel. I can see looking at this car, there's a bit of paint peel here on the window trims, there's paint fade on the roof, and there's a couple of dings on the rear. But again, as I mentioned before, if the car's dirty, this is so much harder to tell. You can probably tell my girlfriend, or I haven't cleaned my girlfriend's car for a long time. So it's very difficult to tell if there's actually anything wrong with this. But it is very important just to have a very good look around the car, take a couple of minutes, do a couple of laps around the car, and see what needs attention. All used cars are going to have some form of imperfection, whether it's paint peel, scratches, dings, whatever. You're not going to find anything that's absolutely pristine and perfect, and if you do, hats off to you, but just keep in mind that these are things you can negotiate with sellers on, particularly if it's on bumpers. A bumper respray, depending on the car, could be around $450 to $500. So just keep that in mind, that if you do find something, it is extra negotiation ammo for you, which is great. So now that you've inspected the outside of the car, it's time to look at the wheels and tires. Check the wheels to see if there's any curb rash. On my girlfriend's car, there is a little bit of curb rash. And then have a look at the tires. There are a few things you want to check with the tires. You want to make sure there's enough tread depth on them. You can actually see on most tires, they'll have tread wear indicators on the inside of the tire. And there'll also be markings on the outside to tell you when the tread is getting low. You also want to have a look for any inconsistencies with tyre wear, particularly on lowered cars. If there's a lot of camber wear on the inside of the tyre, this could be a sign that the tyres will need replacing soon. And if one tyre is more worn than the other side, you want to make sure that this isn't something to do with the suspension. It could just be something as simple as the car needing a new alignment. One handy hack for my Australian viewers is to bring a 20-cent coin with you when you check the tyres. If you stick the 20-cent coin into the central groove of the tyre and the tread doesn't reach the bill of the platypus, this could mean that your tread has less than 3 mils and might need replacing very soon. Now it's time to have a look at the interior. The first thing I always check is if the car smells like it's been smoked in. Personally, I would never buy a car that's been smoked in, but it's up to you. Another thing I always check is the seats. If the seats have any rips or tears or wear, particularly on the bolsters, and if the seat belts are frayed, and if they retract properly. That's something for roadworthy that you need to keep in mind as well. While you're spending a bit of time in the interior, it's a very good idea to turn the car onto accessory mode so you can start playing with the electronic. Put all of the windows down, turn the lights on and off, get out the car, have a look around, make sure the headlights are working, the tail lights are working, put your emergency lights on to make sure all of the indicators are working, make sure the radio works. Another thing, and probably the most important thing in my opinion, having bought cars where this has failed or not worked from the outset, is make sure the heater and aircon work. Regardless of whether you live in a really hot or cold climate, turn the heater on, turn the aircon on, make sure it works. This can be incredibly costly to fix if it is faulty. If it does work but it doesn't blow cold air, this could just be because it needs a regas, and often this is only a couple $100. If it doesn't work, or if it feels weird or smells strange, this could be a sign of a dead heater core, and often in a lot of cars the whole dash has to come out to replace the heater core. So just keep that in mind. Test the brake lights too. If you have a friend that comes with you, they can either sit in the car and put their foot on and off the brake, or if the seller's with you, they should be happy to jump in and show that the brake lights are working, because you don't want to buy a car with faulty brake lights because you could get rear-ended before you make it home. It's also a very good idea to open up all of the doors and the boot and check for any rust or dings inside the door jambs. So have a look down here, under the door sill, and then particularly over here. This is really important on older cars. If you're looking at buying an older Japanese, European, or even American car, they are prone to rust in these spots. And this is very important and where your research from earlier comes into play, because all cars will have rust-prone spots in different areas, particularly if you're buying something old. For example, an E30 BMW that I used to own was very prone to rusting around the boot, whereas a Nissan Skyline that I owned was prone to rusting around the strut towers under the bonnet. So just make sure, that particularly if you're buying something older, that there's no hidden rust or any dodgy rust patch jobs. Another thing a lot of people don't take into consideration when we're looking at the mechanical inspection, which is the next part, is one of the most important things to consider first, and that is whether the car's actually been warmed up before you arrive to the inspection. Cold starting a car is the single best way to tell if there are any strange noises, whines, groans, or smoke coming from the car, as often these will have disappeared by the time the car has been warmed up. If you do arrive to the inspection, particularly if it's at a seller's house, this is a little bit harder if the car's at a shopping centre or out somewhere in public where the seller would have had to drive it there for you. If the car is warm when you arrive, I take this as a red flag, because it will often mean that the seller has purposely tried to warm the car up because it might have issues starting, it might be blowing smoke, it might be doing something really weird when the engine is cold that they don't want you to know about. So keep that in mind, and you always want to be starting the engine cold for the first time. Now it's time to get your torch and your rag out. When you're looking at the engine of the car, you want to check for any obvious leaks directly under the car. You want to have a look around the top of the engine to see if there's any leaks from the rocker cover, from the turbo if the car has one, or just anything else that you can immediately see looking down the side of the engine or above it. You also want to have a look under the oil cap and see if it's milky, smells weird, or discolored, and the same goes with the radiator cap. I'm not going to take it off this car because this car has been warm and I don't want to burn my face off. So if the car has been warmed, do not take the radiator cap off. I'm not going to be responsible if you burn your face off. And also, while you're here, don't just check the oil and the radiator cap. Make sure that you check the oil level with your rag. If there is any residue, give it a wipe with your rag, see what it is. Sometimes it could just be a bit of condensation, but it's also important to have a look at the brake fluid, power steering fluid, clutch fluid if the car's got a reservoir for any of these, just to make sure the fluids are all topped up. Because if they're not, the owner probably hasn't been as diligent as they should. It might be due for a service. There could be multiple reasons for that. It doesn't necessarily mean the car has a problem, but just make sure that all the fluids are topped up. So a large majority of cars will have what's called a coolant overflow tank, which is where you can see if the coolant has been topped up. This is a bit safer to open if the engine's been warm, but often you can tell because there will be two lines on the side of the coolant overflow tank that will dictate if there's enough coolant that's flowing into the radiator. Now, if you're new to cars, you might be wondering how to actually check your oil. You don't just take the dipstick out and look at it, because it's obviously been sitting in the car for ages. So you take the dipstick out, you wipe it down, and then you put it back in for a bit and collect more oil. Then you take it out, and you want to make sure that between these two indicating lines here, there is actually oil on the dipstick. If it's just over, this could just mean that the car's really warm, but you don't want to check the oil when it's cold. You want to check it when the car's actually been warmed up, because it's a better sign to tell if there's enough oil that's been circulating through the engine. So while you're here, after you've checked all the fluids, it's very important as well to have a look and see if there's anything else that looks a little bit out of the ordinary in the engine bay. Sometimes on older cars, there can be a lot of buildup of acid and gunk on the battery terminals, which can be cleaned. Now have a look and see if you can examine the engine belts. So any of the drive belts, alternator belts, fan belts, whatever, have a look and see if these are frayed, because if they are, there's a good sign they're going to snap. I've had that happen to me before on cars where the drive belt has snapped while you've been out and about, and I would not recommend having that happen to anyone. You also want to have a look at the radiator hoses. So give the radiator hoses a squish. If these feel really soft, that could mean that they're fraying, but these are nice and firm. And you want to make sure that they're not loose and about to pop off the radiator either. But I do need to stress there is only so much you can tell just by having a look at the car. So we're about to talk in a sec about what's actually underneath. Equally as important as checking the mechanical portion of the car in the engine bay is what's underneath. You have things like the differential, the gearbox, the oil sump, and all your suspension arms underneath the car that you can't actually see. Sometimes sellers will be happy with you to bring a jack and put the car up in the air to see what it looks like underneath, which is usually an incredibly good sign of a very honest seller. But if they can't let you do this, or if you don't want to do it, this is where I talk later on about getting a pre-purchase inspection, because a professional will come and have a look under the car and tell you everything you need to know, because there can often be gearbox leaks, there can be leaks from the oil sump, there can be leaks from the diff, all sorts of things that you can't immediately tell just by looking around the car and looking in the engine bay. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, is I would not suggest buying a car before you know what's actually underneath, especially if you're buying an older Japanese car. They will often have a lot of rust underneath the cars. The jack points can be very crumpled in, which you can usually see by looking under the car. Now it's time for the exciting part, the test drive. Unless it's a very expensive car or a powerful car, the owner will usually be happy of letting you drive it. If they don't let you drive it, this is probably for a reason, so keep that in mind. They'll either come with you, sit in the passenger seat, sit in the back seat, or they'll take your license and let you go and do the test drive yourself. Just jumping in quickly to mention, when we're doing the test drive, one of my favorite things is getting to know the owner, and particularly if they've loved their car, this will often be a really cool experience, because the owner will start to get a bit sad when they're in the passenger seat, particularly if they've never been in the passenger seat of their own car. They might encourage you to put it into sports mode and give it a little bit, drop it into second gear and give it a bit of gas. It is absolutely awesome when you have built a good relationship with a seller. So this is why I keep coming back to the relationship. It is such an important part of this transaction and this whole process of buying a car, because the better your relationship means the better car at the end of the day. So I just wanted to jump in and say that don't be afraid if a seller wants to come with you. Don't be nervous to actually drive the car. The whole point is that you're trying to examine if the car is the best choice for you. And if a seller can tell that you're trustworthy and that you're not a time waster, often he or she will just let you have a bit of fun with it, particularly if it's an enthusiast car. So let's get back to the test drive. Now, as we mentioned before, you want to be starting the car cold. So when you turn the car on, make sure that you're listening out for any strange whining or noises. There are none here, which is good. So that means we're ready to drive. You want to make sure there's no strange groaning that should be sounding like it's coming from my bedroom when I'm hungover. There's no belt slapping or weird sort of noises coming from the car as soon as it starts. So make sure there's no smoke blowing out the back as well. Now that we're moving, you want to make sure the car's behaving properly. Regardless of if it's automatic or manual, you want to make sure the gears are shifting smoothly, the steering's nice and responsive, and the brakes aren't shuddering or making a weird feel under your feet. If this does happen with the brakes, this could just be because the pads and rotors need replacing, which isn't a biggie. It just becomes extra negotiation ammo for you. So just keep that in mind too. One thing as well that's really important to check, once you've done the cosmetic, you've done the mechanical side of things, is the documentation. Most owners will keep the documentation of their car in the glove box, like this, and diligent owners will keep the service books that the car's had since new and any receipts that they've accumulated over time. These can go missing, owners might not keep all the receipts, so keep that in mind. But I've always found a sign of a diligent seller is the one that keeps as many records as they can. This is the most telltale sign that a car's actually been looked after, if you've got the evidence of all the documents and service history that a car might have. Honestly, in my case, I think the more the better, because it allows you to actually see the history of the car in physical, legitimate form. One other thing that I'll mention, and something that you probably won't find in other car buying guides on the internet, is to never buy the first car you see. This is a lesson that I've learned, having emotionally purchased cars when I probably shouldn't have, but having multiple options of the same car is a really powerful thing as a buyer. Not only does it give you the chance to physically feel the difference between 2 or 3 different cars, but it also will help in your negotiations with the potential car that you might want to buy, because if you have a different option and you have a price and the seller doesn't want to take your price, you can go and get that other option, which is really good. So keep that in mind, even if you're really emotionally attached to the car, even if you really want it. I know it's a big process. I know it takes a lot of time to go and inspect a car and to do all these things that I'm telling you to do, but trust me, keep your options open. Unless it's something really rare or really expensive or something that just doesn't exist elsewhere, there will be another one out there. Also keep in mind the potential cost and need for a roadworthy certificate if you're in the eastern states of Australia. Sometimes sellers will factor this into the price and they'll be happy to sort it for you. Or if you're happy to sort it out yourself, it's $300 that you can take off the price pretty instantly. But you need to make sure that the car is in roadworthy condition before you buy it, because this could lead you into a lot of strife if you haven't done it. And if you're watching this in the UK or the US, keep in mind as well that you might need an MOT or smog, depending on where you are in the world. Another thing that I strongly endorse is a PPI, or pre-purchase inspection. Yes, this is an extra cost, and I know that I've given you some very detailed steps about how to inspect a car, But if you're not a professional, and I'll put my hand up and say that I'm the furthest thing from a mechanic professional, I have had instances before where I thought that I knew it all and I didn't get a PPI done and it has cost me. So it's $300 or so, it can be more or less depending on who you go with, but it can save you thousands of dollars in the long run. And it's one of those things that I've always said the poor man pays twice. So it pays to get your checks and balances done and to have the peace of mind that you are getting it done by a professional. So essentially with a PPI, a licensed mechanic will go out to the seller's house, organise a time with them that works. They have all the tools available. They've got engine compression tools. They'll look under the car. They'll check all sorts of things and give you a very detailed multi-page report on everything that you need to know about buying that particular car. You can get it done through multiple statutory bodies in Australia, like the RAA, NRMA, RACV, or you can have a private company who I've used before, like State Roads, come out and do it for you. And State Roads aren't paying me to say this, I've just had really positive experience with them in the past. I would highly recommend going with them if you're buying a car, because it is a significant investment. And I know that you're already spending a lot of money on this, but trust me, it is worth it, and I cannot recommend this more. Alrighty, so now we're up to the fun part, which is actually making the transaction and buying the car. So now that we've inspected the car, we've made sure it's the right car for us, and we've, again, strongly advised to have it looked at by a professional, it's time for the fun part, which is negotiating and buying, which is my favorite part because it's something that I've practiced a lot. I used to be really crap at it, and now I think I'm pretty good at it. And it's, for me, the most exciting part of buying and selling a car. But I also understand that this step can be really terrifying for most people. But don't worry, because I've done it so many times that I'm here to walk you through it. This is a step where a lot of nervousness and decision fatigue can come into play because you get worried about parting with a significant amount of money, even if doesn't matter if it's $2,000 or $200,000. It's still a significant amount of money and it's still a significant purchase every single time you buy a car. So I get it. I've been there before. You don't know if it's the right thing to do, even if all the signs are telling you that it is. But once we've made the decision, we're ready to roll, it's time to negotiate. Before we get into the negotiation process, one thing that I will recommend, and I've been caught out from this in the past, is do not spend every dollar you have on the purchase of the car. For example, if you have a budget of, let's say, $20,000, don't spend every single dollar of that on the car because you'll need a budget for things like registration, insurance, a roadworthy certificate or any equivalent government certificate that you might need, and a potential kitty for any repairs should things go wrong. Particularly if you're buying something old, always keep a few grand up your sleeve for if something goes wrong shortly after you buy the car, because you don't want to buy a new car and then have it be off the road for a while because you've got no money to fix it. Now, negotiating is an art and it is very difficult, but on any used car, if you've taken all the steps that we've talked about before into account, you will have things to negotiate on and you will have bargaining power with the seller. Now, negotiating is something that you really only get good at, as I mentioned before, by trying, failing, and succeeding. But here's how I can sum it up. The first thing that I recommend is to do some research. Watch some basic videos on the psychology of negotiating and learn that there's a relationship in this transaction. I've mentioned the relationship with the seller before because this is really important to this next step about actually buying the car. The relationship that you started with the seller back from that first message you sent to then inspecting the car, getting to know the seller, to now, this is a crucial part. This is where all that work that you've done previously to this will come into play. Now, like any transaction, it has to be two ways. The seller obviously wants to sell you the car, but they also have a price in mind that they want. Whereas conversely, you want to buy the car, but you have a price in mind. And it's about finding that middle ground, and someone will always win. One thing that I would also suggest is don't get too excited and buy the car as soon as you've finished inspecting it. This is because you obviously at this point haven't left room for a professional inspection, as I endorsed before, and you might also be way too excited about the car and just want to buy it on the spot to not let anyone else get it. Like, I've been there before. I've seen a car, fallen in love with it, bought it on the spot, and then you get home and once the dopamine and the excitement of buying something new wears off, you go, what have I done? I don't want that for you, so I would highly recommend, and something I've learned through buying multiple cars and having this experience multiple times so I can say it with absolute certainty, inspect the car, go home, have a think about it, do some more research, sleep on it, and message the seller the next day. Unless it's something that's up for an absolute steal, in which case sometimes I would suggest just getting it there and then to make sure you don't lose the deal. You will not lose the car by just sleeping on it for one night, particularly if the seller has established that relationship with you, and if they do have other interests on the car, they will often tell you. Now, when you go home, you can take the list of things that you found through your inspection and then start running through a list of what needs to be changed on the car and what can potentially become negotiating power for you. For example, if the tires need replacing, that's something you can negotiate on. If there's a bumper that has a few scratches on it or paint peeling and that needs replacing or painting, that's something you can do. There is a bunch of things that come into play with used cars that can be potential negotiation power for you. So go home, do some research, write up a bit of a list, and I would say that most fair sellers will be happy to dance with you on these problems. This is also where having multiple options comes into play. Before you begin negotiating, do your research to see where the car market is at for this particular model. Pick a price that you're willing to pay and stick to it. I would recommend to always be happy to walk away from the deal if the price isn't right. Again, having multiple options is the best thing for this, because if you pick a price and the seller doesn't want to meet you there, you have another choice, and that's not a problem. You're not going to lose buying this particular car because you will have multiple options to play with. And when you're negotiating with a seller, if they are a bit hard to budge, you can always drop something saying like, oh, like I've looked at a couple of other ones and, there's this particular feature on car Z that's better than yours, car A, and I'm going to go with car Z instead if you don't want to drop your price on car A. I've done this multiple times before. And again, with the current state the world's economy is in, it's a very good buyer's market, and you have the ultimate position of power in this current economical climate. So keep that in mind when you're buying a car. Another overarching thing that I'd recommend is whether you're texting, calling, or going back to see the seller in person to broker the deal, be respectful. People always say it costs nothing to be kind. And if you've developed a relationship with the seller, the more respectful and the kinder you are, the more flexible often they will be with their pricing. So for example, if you're buying a car that's worth $20,000, don't go straight in and offer $12,000 without even saying anything, because I almost guarantee you that unless they're selling for some bizarre reason, this will never work. Sellers will always list a car for a few grand more than they're willing to take to allow room for negotiation. For example, if you're looking to buy a car worth $20,000, sellers might often list it for 23, 24, 25 grand. I've had instances before where you get a whole lot more off the list price just by negotiating and by developing this relationship as I talked about before. But I can't recommend to you a potential figure to take into any transaction. It's not like I can say, take off 25% or 30% of any car's list price, because every situation is different. So just be smart about it. Consider all the factors that we talked about before with your inspection, what the car's actually worth at market, how unique it is dependent on its potential specification, if it's got a rare color, what modifications it might have, if it does have any, how many kilometers it has, what year it is, so forth. It's just keep those things in mind, because these are all things that become really important when you're actually brokering the deal. The buying tip is that you can always use timeliness to your advantage. If you've taken the time to meet with a seller on, say, a Saturday morning, you can offer them a potential pickup on Sunday if you're confident about the car. Now keep in mind, on weekends you might not be able to get a mechanic to actually come out and inspect the car, but if you're confident in the car that you're buying, you can say, seen the car Saturday, I've slept on it, message a seller again Sunday morning, send them a deposit, usually electronically, to secure the car. This means that no one else can buy it if you've taken a deposit, usually, unless the seller's a dick. And then basically you can say, I'll come pick it up Sunday night and deliver you the rest of the cash in hand or EFT. One thing I do want to mention with deposits is that they are usually non-refundable, particularly in a private transaction. I've done most of my buying and selling in private transactions, and the rule of thumb is once you hand a deposit to someone, if you back out of the deal, they get to keep that money as a form of, I guess, sort of time wasting or holding the car or delaying the sale potentially for someone else. So just keep that in mind. Deposits are usually, it's different in every situation, but it's either $1,000 or 10% of the car's value. I've done both depending on the value of the car, but usually I just send them $1,000 to say, here's $1,000. It's a sign of me saying that I want to buy this car and I'm going to organize the rest of the money. Now, timeliness will work most of the time if you have immediate access to the funds. If you have to finance money for the car, that's a whole separate conversation and not something that I have a massive amount of experience with, but I'm happy to do some research and make a video later on about financing. But this video is focusing on having the cash ready and being able to buy the car as soon as you and the seller make it. And lastly, never be afraid to walk away. This is something that's really tricky, particularly if you've found that you've become quite emotionally invested in the car. Like, I get it. It's a massive process from finding the car, establishing a relationship with the seller, making time to inspect the car, going out to inspect it. It's hard work, particularly if you're not used to negotiating with someone. And it can be quite, it can make you quite nervous and tired, and it is pretty exhausting, but you have to be prepared to walk away. That's one immediate thing that I'll tell you is I have had instances before where I haven't walked away and I've become emotionally invested in the car, and I'm only telling you this because I've made this mistake several times, and I would hate for one of you watching this to make that mistake, because it is a very, very easy thing to do, but always be happy to walk away because you never know when this might actually work in your favor. Let's say that you are buying the car for $20,000. The seller has it up for 22 grand. He wants to take 20. You originally wanted to pay 15, but you're happy to come up and meet him at 17 and a half. Let's imagine you're walking through this situation. You've got to the point where he's trying to be hard at 22, you're trying to be hard at 15, he's dropped to 21, you've come up to 16, he's dropped to 20 but doesn't want to go any further, and you said, okay, look, I'm sorry, my budget for this is only 17 and a half, keeping in mind that we're not spending every single dollar of the $20,000 that we have on buying this car. Be prepared to turn around and walk away. I've done this before a handful of times where you physically turn around and start walking the other way and say, okay, no worries, like I'm going to go and look at the other one, which goes back to looking at the options. And you turn around and walk away and the seller goes, oh, stuff it, like you're here, let's just get it done. Let's get it done. I'm not going to argue over 2 or 3 grand, whatever. And then you turn around with the smuggest smile on your face and say, okay, no worries, let's do it. And then you've got the deal done. So this doesn't work all the time. I'm not saying that you're going to have some movie action hero moment when you go and buy a car where you can sort of walk off like the cool guy who walks off after an explosion and turn around to buy the car. That's not going to work every time, but it does show the power in having the ability to walk away. So now that we've given you some tips on negotiating, I've discussed how to send a deposit. It's time to actually pay the rest of the money. This is quite a tricky part, and I wanted to speak about this in this video because this is where your relationship with the seller will be really tested. Because on one hand, let's say you're buying the car for $20,000 again. You don't want to part with $20,000 without having the keys to your car in your hand, whereas conversely, the seller isn't going to give you the keys to his car or her car without $20,000 in their hand or in their bank account. So what I've done before multiple times is after you send the deposit, keep in mind this is judging on an electronic transfer. If you're paying cash, this is a lot easier. But if you're sending it electronically, once you send the $1,000 or the $10,000 deposit and it has landed in that person's account, often if you send a follow-up amount, if the car's 20 grand and you're paying 17 and a half, you send the other 16 and a half grand, that will land in their account straight away. This might not work all the time though, but often what I will do is I will organize a time to come pick up the car if I'm paying with an EFT. I will bring along with me a bill of sale document, which we'll talk about in a second. Make sure you get a picture of the owner's driver's license and they get a picture of your driver's license just to make sure that you're covered on both ends. And then once you arrive, you'll pick up the car. Usually you will open up your phone, get their phone out, show them that you're sending the money across, like physically type it in on your bank app, send them the money while they're looking. And I've found this to be a particularly successful tool, even if the money doesn't land straight away, because people do acknowledge that it does take 24 hours sometimes for big transactions to clear. They can often be happy with you taking the car even if the money hasn't cleared. So I've done it before plenty of times where I've sent the money and I've shown them that I'm sending the money. They've seen it. They've seen the green tick pop up in my bank account. I've sent them a screenshot of the transaction and then we do the rego transfer and take the car. So that can happen. So keep that in mind. Cash is always king, I think, but having bought a very expensive car recently for a friend of mine with all cash, it is incredibly nerve-wracking walking around with that much cash. So I prefer to do it with an EFT, but if you can get the cash out, if that's the way you want to pay, do that. It's much easier. because it is that physical sign of money rather than just having a screenshot land in someone's bank account. So once we've made the transaction, you want to sign a bill of sale document. So this is essentially a document, and there's templates for these online everywhere. So the bill of sale document is essentially a legal document that spells out all the details of the car, including the VIN number, your name, the seller's name, the price you're paying for the car, the date the car was picked up, and you and the seller will both sign it. And this can be a legal document that if something goes wrong, you should be able to use in court. But don't quote me on that. I'm not a lawyer. It's just something that I've done for that peace of mind factor to actually formally recognize the sale. But do your own research on that and suss that one out. My last tip on before you pick up the car is to organize insurance before you get there. The last thing you want is to be really excited about picking up your new car, to turn around and get rear-ended or T-boned on the way home. I would hate to see anyone get into a crash in any circumstance, having just gone through that with my E36, but make sure that you have the insurance sorted before you pick the car up, because this is a huge peace of mind thing. You never know what can happen. You don't know who's out there. Like this happened with my crash the other week. You just never know what's going to happen at any time. So just be really careful, and please organize the insurance before you pick the car up. The very last step to actually making the car officially yours is transferring the registration. I'm speaking from experience in Australia. I'm not sure what the system is if you're watching this from the US or the UK or anywhere else in the world, but in Australia, all states have a electronic registration system where you essentially log into your phone, you log on to your registration portal, the seller will log on to theirs, and the seller will transfer you the details of the car electronically. So if the car's got 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever registration left, they can transfer the registration into your name. You pay a percentage of the vehicle's value on stamp duty. You put in the details of the time and date that the car was acquired, and then once that's processed, you've paid your stamp duty as the buyer. The car is then legally transferred into your name. Getting a roadworthy certificate done is another thing that I mentioned before if you are in the eastern states of Australia. So this is something you will need to do when you're registering the car in your name in Victoria, Queensland, and New South Wales. So don't forget that either. So once that's all done, you've made the transaction, the money's in the seller's account, you've transferred the rego, you've got your RWC done if you need it, and you've organized your insurance. Congratulations. The car is all yours and you are ready to go. Now, to summarize, in this video, we've covered everything from my experience of buying and selling 25 plus cars and bikes, of how to find a car, how to inspect a car, the common tips and tricks and traps to avoid, and then how to actually make the transaction. And I've given you a small little masterclass into the art of negotiating. Now, I'm really keen to follow this video up with any extra questions you have or things that I might have potentially missed, having covered such a wide range of topics. There are so many things on this video that I can go into more granular detail on. I haven't even discussed how to buy a car if you're interstate, which is something I've done many times before, so I'm keen to make a separate video on that. So I'd love to know what you guys want to know with this topic, so just hit me up in the comments below. I genuinely do not think there is a more comprehensive guide on buying and selling cars that you can find on the internet for free. If you feel otherwise, again, let me know in the comments and I will do my best to fix it up in future videos. But I haven't seen anything for free that you can access from someone who has bought as many cars and bikes as me. So it would mean a lot for me, because I put a lot of effort into this video, if you could subscribe to the channel, send this to any family or friends who need tips buying cars, and leave a comment below about what you enjoyed and follow along for more videos. My name's Pat, you've been watching 2PJZ, and we'll see you next week.